Book Talk begins at 9 minutes and 18 seconds. Welcome to CraftLit, the podcast for crafters who love books. My name is Heather Ordover, and I'm podcasting from where the Delaware River meets the Old York Road, New Hope, Pennsylvania. Episode 637, Garbage In, Garbage Out. This episode of CraftLit is brought to you by our patrons at patreon.com/craftlit. This week, we would like to thank Tina Jackson, Elizabeth Gardner, Deborah Jackson Weiss, Jeff Eisenhower, and Maria V. Thank you so much. We couldn't do this without you. Well, hello. How are you? I'm a little nervous because I'm recording this considerably in advance of when I usually record because I forgot completely that this week there is an election and I am an election worker. So that's going to be a lot of doing. And I haven't been doing much, so we've tried to figure out like where I can go lay down if I plummet tomorrow. It'll be interesting. But regardless, the nice thing is it should be a quiet election here, and that's a huge relief. Plus, you know, it's a great group of people who I get to work with every time that there is a primary or an election, and that makes me happy. So I get to see human people. Yay. So you may wonder, what is the garbage in, garbage outness of this episode? Since I'm here talking about elections, the garbage in, garbage out is because I just got a message from Tara Worster, who has gotten a new car and was desperate to figure out, are there good settings for you to use in a car to make kind of meh audiobook audio, like what we often still rely on from LibriVox. Is there anything that we can do to make that sound better? And the answer is, well, kind of. The garbage in, garbage out is something that I read about from a bunch of audio engineers when Procasters started getting into the field and expectations for what our audio was going to sound like certainly expanded. And it was easier to tell when somebody was just sitting at a kitchen table recording into a laptop microphone. Once that started happening, I was doing a lot of research on audio. If you were listening at the time, I can't even remember what book we were doing at the time. It was before Count of Monte Cristo. One of the things that I learned was if your mic, your setup, your situation is not quiet enough, if your mic has hums in it or buzzes in it, if you are recording in a room with too many flat surfaces, or with your microphone angled so that if you speak, for example, I am right now speaking at my computer screen, which is a hard surface, which means that my sound is going to bounce off the computer screen back at me. And then if I had a hard wall behind me, which I do not, if I had a hard wall behind me, it would then bounce again and come back. And this time it would be aimed in the right direction to hit my microphone. So there are a couple ways that I work to avoid that. Number one, I'm in the basement and it's pretty quiet. Every once in a while, you can probably hear somebody walking, but over my head. But for the most part, it's pretty quiet in here. I have surrounded myself in soft things like yarn and draperies. But the other thing that I do is I set the microphone at a slight angle so that even if sound does bounce, it is not going to bounce directly into the microphone. And that is not something that normal people would think to do. So there are two things. Number one, I have put the same links into the show notes that I sent to Tara. One very interesting from 2006 So 17 years ago when the podcast started, one very interesting conversation between a couple of people on the Apple support site and another link to some more detailed audio information about setting equalizers, car equalizers, phone equalizers, all of that stuff, including the fact that depending on what app you are listening on through your car audio system, if you are in that kind of a car situation, your iPhone, I don't know about Androids, your iPhone audio equalizer won't matter because its settings are only going to be applied to the sound that is leaving the phone when you are using the phone's native audio app. I don't even know if the native Apple podcast app would take note of those equalizer settings. So I don't know. It may just be iTunes or whatever it's called now. Music, I think, whatever. So, she said scornfully. So if you too have had frustrations in vehicles trying to listen to audiobooks and things, the easiest change that I make on my car's system to quickly improve, at least slightly, the audio quality is the fader. If you can fade the audio to the back seat more than to the front seat, I don't know if those speakers are different, or like I said to Tara, maybe it's the way that the wheel wells and the back seats are constructed. Sound bounces differently. I don't know, but it does add a level of richness and take away some of the, what we hear is, some people describe it as boomy audio, or it's kind of weirdly echoey, like somebody's recording in a kitchen or a bathroom where they're using their computer microphone and the sound is bouncing around funnily. So that's all. Garbage in, garbage out. There is not much we can do. Eric and I can work valiantly to try and rescue audio that's been poorly recorded in the first place. And that is not ever going to, on our budget, allow us to fix audio the way that like Peter Jackson could fix audio on the Beatles' Let It Be movie that they did. And oh my gosh, did you hear? There was one tape left of John Lennon just kind of noodling around on the piano. And before George Harrison passed away, Ringo, Paul, and George got together and they worked on trying to rescue, I think there were 3 songs at the time. The one that they could not rescue 20 years ago was the one where John is singing because he was playing the piano and the piano was closer to the microphone than his mouth was. But Peter Jackson came along and they rescued it. So it's pretty cool. It's a sweet little song. It's not, Get Back or anything, but it's nice. It's not Imagine. But wow, I mean, hearing a new John Lennon song with Beatles in the background is kind of cool. But that kind of audio finesse is so difficult to do and requires so much more brain power than any of our computers have. So that's just what it is. What it also means is if you or someone you know would like to be reading for CraftLit, please tell them to contact me because that could be useful. Heather@craftlit.com. And Kim Zuckert, if you are listening right now, I'm going to be contacting you soon, just so you know. All right, so that's everything from me. I have very, very few notes for you beforehand. I have a couple of fun things to just make sure you didn't miss on the flip side. But today we are going to do 3 chapters again. The first one, we know D'Artagnan is in the field. The Musketeers haven't arrived yet because the king's been sick. We are picking up exactly where we left off there. And then the next 2 chapters, 43 and 44, really are the same story or the same arc. And I didn't want to split them up. So a couple of things. I could not find any reason why Anjou wine, Anjou wine, might be considered particularly spectacular, except that apparently in the Anjou Valley where this wine is produced, Heather, they can produce a whole mess load of things. Like some regions only really grow white grapes and some only red. This is a place where they do a whole lot of stuff. But I couldn't find anything historically for why this would have been particularly important. But it sounds like people thought it was back then. So if anybody wine experty who is listening, let us know, heather@craftlit.com or 206-350-1642. I would be fascinated. I don't know that much about wine, but I like it. So there's that. There's a statement about pouring the lees out, Lees, of the wine. Because I don't know much about wine, I've never heard of this before, but now I understand what I've been seeing, which is sometimes in some white wines, which you wouldn't necessarily think would have quite as much body as a red wine might, sometimes you'll get a white wine that really feels very velvety and kind of big on your mouth. Busy, but never precocious. Often what that is, it's part of the broken down yeast that is part of the wine. And so there's the richness of the yeast. Like if you've ever put nutritional yeast into a soup base, it can really add some body to the flavor. It's that kind of thing. And so it wouldn't necessarily taste bad. It wouldn't be tart or sour or anything like that, but it would be sedimenty-ish, it sounds like. And honestly, it sounds like it would probably taste pretty good if you were feeling kind of meh, honestly. So you will hear somebody talk about pouring off the lees to drink, which at first I thought, well, why would you pour something off? That sounds like it must be bad. No, not necessarily. It's not like finding the coin in a king cake. It's not bad. Purveyor of the Musketeers. When you hear the word purveyor, that sounds like somebody who's going out and buying the Musketeers. No, he's the host to the Musketeers. He's hosting the Musketeers. You are going to hear the word disciplined as a stand-in for incarcerated. One of the Musketeers is going to say, we haven't been disciplined. And what he means is we haven't been locked up. There's also a very odd term that I've been having trouble finding. Pinnacles and lugers and sloops I have heard of. These are ships, sailing ships. It sounds like verrucas, which I thought were worts. So if anybody has more details on the verrucaness of boats or ships, let me know. Because that was weird. And that's bugging me. And that is something that has been translated to sloops in both of the modern texts that I have access to, but in the old one, not so much. In the chapter called The Red Dovecote, that's because there is a place that they are going to be at called The Red Dovecote. And that sounds kind of strange. Like, why would you have a red dovecote and why would it matter to Three Musketeers? And the answer is because that actually was the name of a little town, a little hamlet. And it was just northwest of La Rochelle. I do not know if it is still there or not. But where they were going was in this kind of neutral zone, this not no man's land. That sounds like World War I and full of barbed wire. It was this neutral zone between the walled city and the fortifications. So it was a place you could go, but it might not be safe for, say, me to go there when there is about to be a siege on, is the thing. There are a lot of names that are going to be slung around, and all of them were real people, and all of them were kind of important, but there were a few things that get slung around that actually have historical repercussions to them. I am not going to tell you about them now. So if you hear something, you go, that sounds like a joke, or that sounds like I should know what that's about, I will fill you in on the flip side. I don't want to, I couldn't figure out a way to explain it without spoiling it. So I don't want to do that. There's a phrase that is left in the French, both in the modern texts and in the older texts as well, hors de combat, which was not being able to be a combatant. You're out of action. You're out of commission for a little while. There are two people who are going to get mentioned, and I am going to give you a heads up on this one because it doesn't spoil anything for you. Bois-Robert and Marquis de Boutroux. His name gets spelled several different ways, and it made me very frustrated. But there are two guys who are writers, and you're going to hear them used as a threat, kind of a snarky threat. This is because these two guys were friends of the king and of the cardinal. They were very witty. They were very smart. And they would take you apart in court, but in writing, so that all of the insults that they created surrounding you would live on. This is not something you want to have happen to you. It's kind of like watching Jordan Klepper or satires on The Daily Show where they're interviewing somebody who is making a complete and utter totem themselves. It's that kind of thing. They were very, very good at it and very liked by the people who they weren't ripping apart, which is not a huge surprise, right? When you hear, especially, there's a conversation surrounding the Palais de Justice, that is something I am going to go in with you after. That's part of that whole chunk where I just didn't want to blow it for you, but that way you'll know, yes, this is the part we're going to find out about. Do please listen for some serious silliness from especially Porthos and Aramis. There are these sly little one-liners that they just are rolling off their tongues early on in our chapters today, and it's just so much fun. And yeah, that's it. All right, let's listen. So, chapters 42, 43, and 44 of the Three Musketeers, written by Alexandre Dumas. And if you are listening to the John Lee or some other version, you can flip ahead to 1 hour, 11 minutes, and 43 seconds. Otherwise, here we go.
Chapter 42 of the D'Artagnan Romances, Volume 1, The Three Musketeers by Alexandre Dumas, translated by William Robson. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The Anjou Wine. After the most disheartening news of the king's health, a report of his convalescence began to prevail in the camp, and as he was very anxious to be in person at the siege, it was said that as soon as he could mount a horse, he would set forward. Meantime, Monsieur, who knew that from one day to the other he might expect to be removed from his command by the Duc d'Angoulême, by Bassompierre, or by Schomberg, who were all eager for his post, did but little, lost his days in wavering, and did not dare to attempt any great enterprise to drive the English from the Isle of Ré, where they still besieged the citadel Saint-Martin and the fort of Le Pré, as on their side the French were besieging La Rochelle. D'Artagnan, as we have said, had become more tranquil, as always happens after a past danger, particularly when the danger seems to have vanished. He only felt one uneasiness, and that was at not hearing any tidings from his friends. But one morning, at the commencement of the month of November, everything was explained to him by this letter, dated from Villeroy. Monsieur d'Artagnan, Messieurs Athos, Porthos, and Aramis, after having had an entertainment at my house and enjoying themselves very much, created such a disturbance that the provost of the castle, a rigid man, has ordered them to be confined for some days. But I accomplished the order they have given me by forwarding to you a dozen bottles of my Anjou wine, with which they are much pleased. They are desirous that you should drink to their health in their favorite wine. I have done this, and am, monsieur, with great respect, your very humble and obedient servant, Godot, purveyor of the Musketeers. That's all well, cried D'Artagnan. They think of me in their pleasures as I thought of them in my troubles. Well, I will certainly drink to their health with all my heart, but I will not drink alone. And D'Artagnan went among those guardsmen with whom he had formed a greater intimacy than with the others, to invite them to enjoy with him this present of delicious Anjou wine which had been sent him from Villeroy. One of the two guardsmen was engaged that evening, and another the next, so the meeting was fixed for the day after that. D'Artagnan, on his return, sent the 12 bottles of wine to the refreshment room of the guards, with strict orders that great care should be taken of it, and then, on the day appointed, as the dinner was fixed for midday, D'Artagnan sent Planchet at 9 in the morning to assist in preparing everything for the entertainment. Planchet, very proud of being raised to the dignity of landlord, thought he would make all ready, like an intelligent man, and with this view called in the assistance of the lackey of one of his master's guests, named Fourreau, and the false soldier who had tried to kill D'Artagnan, and who, belonging to no corps, had entered into the service of D'Artagnan, or rather of Planchet, after D'Artagnan had saved his life. The hour of the banquet being come, the 2 guards arrived, took their places, and the dishes were arranged on the table. Planchet waited, towel on arm, Fourreau uncorked the bottles, and Brisemont, which was the name of the convalescent, poured the wine, which was a little shaken by its journey, carefully into decanters. Of this wine, the first bottle being a little thick at the bottom, Brisemont poured the lees into a glass, and D'Artagnan desired him to drink it, for the poor devil had not yet recovered his strength. The guests, having eaten the soup, were about to lift the first glass of wine to their lips, when all at once the cannon sounded from Fort Louis and Fort Neuf. The guardsmen, imagining this to be caused by some unexpected attack, either of the besieged or the English, sprang to their swords. D'Artagnan, not less forward than they, did likewise, and all ran out in order to repair to their posts. But scarcely were they out of the room before they were made aware of the cause of the noise. Cries of "Live the king! Live the cardinal!" resounded on every side, and the drums were beaten in all directions. In short, the king, impatient, as has been said, had come by forced marches, and had that moment arrived with all his household and a reinforcement of 10,000 troops. His Musketeers proceeded and followed him. D'Artagnan, placed in line with his company, saluted with an expressive gesture his 3 friends, whose eyes soon discovered him, and M. de Tréville, who detected him at once. The ceremony of reception over, the 4 friends were soon in one another's arms. "Pardieu!" cried D'Artagnan, "you could not have arrived in better time. The dinner cannot have had time to get cold, can it, gentlemen?" added the young man, turning to the 2 guards, whom he introduced to his friends.
"Aha!" said Porthos. "It appears we are feasting."
"I hope," said Aramis, "there are no women at your dinner." "Is there any drinkable wine in your tavern?" asked Athos. "Well, pardieu, there is yours, my dear friend," replied D'Artagnan. "Our wine?" said Athos, astonished. "Yes, that you sent me." "We sent you wine?" "You know very well the wine from the hills of Anjou." "Yes, I know what brand you are talking about." "Or the wine you prefer." "Well, in the absence of champagne and chambertin, you must content yourselves with that."
"And so, connoisseurs in wine as we are, we have sent you some Anjou wine?" said Porthos. "Not exactly. It is the wine that was sent by your order."
"On our account?" said the 3 Musketeers. "Did you send this wine, Aramis?" said Athos. "No. And you, Porthos?"
"No. And you, Athos?"
"No." "If it was not you, it was your purveyor," said D'Artagnan.
"Our purveyor?"
"Yes, your purveyor, Godeau, the purveyor of the Musketeers."
"My faith, never mind where it comes from," said Porthos. "Let us taste it, and if it is good, let us drink it."
"No," said Athos. "Don't let us drink wine which comes from an unknown source." "You are right, Athos," said D'Artagnan. "Did none of you charge your purveyor Godeau to send me some wine?"
"No, and yet you say he has sent you some as from us."
"Here is his letter," said D'Artagnan, and he presented the note to his comrades. "This is not his writing," said Athos. "I am acquainted with it. Before we left Villeroy, I settled the accounts of the regiment."
"A false letter altogether," said Porthos. "We have not been disciplined."
"D'Artagnan," said Aramis in a reproachful tone. "How could you believe that we had made a disturbance?" D'Artagnan grew pale, and a convulsive trembling shook all his limbs. "Thou alarmest me," said Athos, who never used the thee and thou but on very particular occasions. "What has happened?" "Look you, my friends," cried D'Artagnan, "a horrible suspicion crosses my mind. Can this be another vengeance of that woman?" It was now Athos who turned pale. D'Artagnan rushed toward the refreshment room. The three Musketeers and the two guards followed him. The first object that met the eyes of D'Artagnan on entering the room was Brisemont, stretched upon the ground and rolling in horrible convulsions. Planchet and Fourreau, as pale as death, were trying to give him succor, but it was plain that all assistance was useless. All the features of the dying man were distorted with agony. "Ah!" cried he on perceiving D'Artagnan. "Ah! This is frightful! You pretend to pardon me, and you poison me!" "I!" cried D'Artagnan. "I, wretch! What do you say?" "I say that it was you who gave me the wine. I say that it was you who desired me to drink it. I say you wish to avenge yourself on me, and I say that is horrible." "Do not think so, Brisemont," said D'Artagnan. "Do not think so. I swear to you, I protest." "Oh, but God is above. God will punish you. My God, grant that he may one day suffer what I suffer." "Upon the gospel," said D'Artagnan, throwing himself down by the dying man, "I swear to you that the wine was poisoned and that I was going to drink of it as you did." "I do not believe you," cried the soldier, and he expired amid horrible tortures. "Frightful, frightful," murmured Athos, while Porthos broke the bottles and Aramis gave orders, a little too late, that a confessor should be sent for. "Oh, my friends," said D'Artagnan, "you come once more to save my life, not only mine, but that of these gentlemen. Gentlemen," continued he, addressing the guardsmen, "I request you will be silent with regard to this adventure. Great personages may have had a hand in what you have seen, and if talked about, the evil would only recoil upon us." "Ah, monsieur," stammered Planchet, more dead than alive. "Ah, monsieur, what an escape I have had!" "How, sirrah! You were going to drink my wine?" "To the health of the king, monsieur. I was going to drink a small glass of it if Fourreau had not told me I was called." "Alas!" said Fourreau, whose teeth clattered with terror. "I wanted to get him out of the way that I might drink it myself." "Gentlemen," said D'Artagnan, addressing the guardsmen, "you may easily comprehend that such a feast can only be very dull after what has taken place. So accept my excuses, and put off the party till another day, I beg of you." The two guardsmen courteously accepted D'Artagnan's excuses, and perceiving that the four friends desired to be alone, retired. When the young guardsmen and the three Musketeers were without witnesses, they looked at one another with an air which plainly expressed that each of them perceived the gravity of their situation. "In the first place," said Athos, "let us leave this chamber. The dead are not agreeable company, particularly when they have died a violent death." "Planchet," said D'Artagnan, "I commit the corpse of this poor devil to your care. Let him be interred in holy ground. He committed a crime, it is true, but he repented of it." And the four friends quit the room, leaving to Planchet and Fourreau the duty of paying mortuary honors to Brisemont. The host gave them another chamber and served them with fresh eggs and some water, which Athos went himself to draw at the fountain. In a few words, Porthos and Aramis were posted as to the situation. "Well," said D'Artagnan to Athos, "you see, my dear friend, that this is war to the death." Athos shook his head. "Yes, yes," replied he, "I perceive that plainly. But do you really believe it is she?" "I am sure of it." Nevertheless, I confess I still doubt.
But the fleur-de-lis on her shoulder.
She is some Englishwoman who has committed a crime in France and has been branded in consequence.
Athos, she is your wife, I tell you, repeated D'Artagnan. Only reflect how much the two descriptions resemble each other.
Yes, but I should think the other must be dead. I hanged her so effectually. It was D'Artagnan who now shook his head in his turn. But in either case, what is to be done? Said the young man. The fact is, one cannot remain thus with a sword hanging eternally over his head, said Athos. We must extricate ourselves from this position. But how? Listen, you must try to see her and have an explanation with her. Say to her, peace or war, my word as a gentleman never to say anything of you, never to do anything against you. On your side, a solemn oath to remain neutral with respect to me. If not, I will apply to the chancellor, I will apply to the king, I will apply to the hangman, I will move the courts against you, I will denounce you as branded, I will bring you to trial, and if you are acquitted, well, by the faith of a gentleman, I will kill you at the corner of some wall as I would a mad dog. I like the means well enough, said D'Artagnan, but where and how to meet with her? Time, dear friend, time brings round opportunity. Opportunity is the martingale of man. The more we have ventured, the more we gain when we know how to wait. Yes, but to wait surrounded by assassins and poisoners? Bah, said Athos. God has preserved us hitherto. God will preserve us still. Yes, we. Besides, we are men, and everything considered, it is our lot to risk our lives. But she? Asked he in an undertone. What she? Asked Athos. Constance. Madame Bonacieux. Ah, that is true, said Athos. My poor friend, I had forgotten you were in love. Well, but, said Aramis, have you not learned by the letter you found on the wretched corpse that she is in a convent? One may be very comfortable in a convent, and as soon as the siege of La Rochelle is terminated, I promise you on my part. Good, cried Athos. Good. Yes, my dear Aramis, we all know that your views have a religious tendency. I am only temporarily a musketeer, said Aramis humbly. It is some time since we heard from his mistress, said Athos in a low voice. But take no notice. We know all about that.
Well, said Porthos, it appears to me that the means are very simple.
What?
You say she is in a convent, replied Porthos.
Yes.
Very well. As soon as the siege is over, we'll carry her off from that convent.
But we must first learn what convent she is in.
That is true, said Porthos.
But I think I have it, said Athos. Don't you say, dear D'Artagnan, that it is the queen who has made choice of the convent for her? I believe so, at least. In that case, Porthos will assist us.
And how so, if you please?
Why, by your marchioness, your duchess, your princess. She must have a long arm.
Hush, said Porthos, placing a finger on his lips. I believe her to be a cardinalist. She must know nothing of the matter.
Then, said Aramis, I take upon myself to obtain intelligence of her. You, Aramis? Cried the three friends. You? And how? By the queen's almoner, to whom I am very intimately allied, said Aramis, coloring. On this assurance, the four friends who had finished their modest repast separated with the promise of meeting again that evening. D'Artagnan returned to less important affairs, and the Three Musketeers repaired to the king's quarters, where they had prepared their lodging. End of chapter 42. Recording by John Van Stan, Savannah, Georgia. Chapter 43 of the D'Artagnan Romances, Volume 1, The Three Musketeers by Alexandre Dumas, translated by William Robson. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The Sign of the Red Dovecot. Meanwhile, the king, who with more reason than the cardinal showed his hatred for Buckingham, although scarcely arrived, was in such a haste to meet the enemy that he commanded every disposition to be made to drive the English from the Isle of Ré, and afterwards to press the siege of La Rochelle. But notwithstanding his earnest wish, he was delayed by the dissensions which broke out between Messieurs Bassompierre and Schomberg against the Duc d'Angoulême. Messieurs Bassompierre and Schomberg were marshals of France, and claimed their right of commanding the army under the orders of the king. But the cardinal, who feared that Bassompierre, a Huguenot at heart, might press but feebly the English in Rochelle, his brothers in religion, supported the Duc d'Angoulême, whom the king at his instigation had named lieutenant general. The result was that to prevent Messieurs Bassompierre and Schomberg from deserting the army, a separate command had to be given to each. Bassompierre took up his quarters on the north of the city between Leu and Dampierre, the Duc d'Angoulême on the east from Dampierre to Périgny, and Monsieur de Schomberg on the south from Périgny to Angoutin. The quarters of Messieurs were at Dampierre. The quarters of the king were sometimes at Estrée, sometimes at Jarry. The cardinal's quarters were upon the downs at the bridge of La Pierre, in a simple house without any entrenchment, so that Monsieur watched Bassompierre, the king, the Duc d'Angoulême, and the cardinal, Monsieur de Schomberg. As soon as this organization was established, they set about driving the English from the Isle. The juncture was favorable. The English, who require above everything good living in order to be good soldiers, only eating salt meat and bad biscuit, had many invalids in their camp. Still further, the sea, very rough at this period of the year all along the seacoast, destroyed every little day some little vessel, and the shore, from the point of L'Aiguillon to the trenches, was at every tide literally covered with the wrecks of pinnacles, roberges, and feluccas. The result was that even if the king's troops remained quietly in their camp, it was evident that some day or other Buckingham, who only continued in the Isle from obstinacy, would be obliged to raise the siege. But as Monsieur de Toiras gave information that everything was preparing in the enemy's camp for a fresh assault, the king judged that it would be best to put an end to this affair and gave the necessary orders for a decisive action. As it is not our intention to give a journal of the siege, but on the contrary only to describe such of the events of it as are connected with the story we are relating, we will content ourselves with saying in 2 words that the expedition succeeded, to the great astonishment of the king and the great glory of the cardinal. The English, repulsed foot by foot, beaten in all encounters, and defeated in the passage of the Isle of Loy, were obliged to re-embark, leaving on the field of battle 2,000 men, among whom were 5 colonels, 3 lieutenant colonels, 250 captains, 20 gentlemen of rank, 4 pieces of cannon, and 60 flags, which were taken to Paris by Claude de Saint-Simon, and suspended with great pomp in the arches of Notre Dame. Te Deums were chanted in camp, and afterward throughout France. The cardinal was left free to carry on the siege without having, at least at the present, anything to fear on the part of the English. But it must be acknowledged, this response was but momentary. An envoy of the Duke of Buckingham, named Montague, was taken, and proof was obtained of a league between the German Empire, Spain, England, and Lorraine. This league was directed against France. Still further, in Buckingham's lodging, which he had been forced to abandon more precipitately than he expected, papers were found which confirmed this alliance and which, as the cardinal asserts in his memoirs, strongly compromised Madame de Chevreuse and consequently the queen. It was upon the cardinal that all the responsibility fell, for one is not a despotic minister without responsibility. All, therefore, of the vast resources of his genius were at work night and day, engaged in listening to the least report heard in any of the great kingdoms of Europe. The cardinal was acquainted with the activity, and more particularly the hatred of Buckingham. If the league which threatened France triumphed, all his influence would be lost. Spanish policy and Austrian policy would have their representatives in the cabinet of the Louvre, where they had as yet but partisans, and he, Richelieu, the French minister, the national minister, would be ruined. The king, even while obeying him like a child, hated him as a child hates his master, and would abandon him to the personal vengeance of Monsieur and the queen. He would then be lost, and France perhaps with him. All this must be prepared against. Courtiers, becoming every instant more numerous, succeeded one another day and night in the little house of the Bridge of La Pierre, in which the cardinal had established his residence. There were monks who wore the frock with such an ill grace that it was easy to perceive they belonged to the church militant, women a little inconvenienced by their costume as pages and whose large trousers could not entirely conceal their rounded forms, and peasants with blackened hands but with fine limbs, savoring of the man of quality a league off. There were also less agreeable visits, for 2 or 3 times reports were spread that the cardinal had nearly been assassinated. It is true that the enemies of the cardinal said that it was he himself who set these bungling assassins to work, in order to have, if wanted, the right of using reprisals, but we must not believe everything ministers say, nor everything their enemies say. These attempts did not prevent the cardinal, to whom his most inveterate detractors have never denied personal bravery, from making nocturnal excursions, sometimes to communicate to the Duc d'Angoulême important orders, sometimes to confer with the king, and sometimes to have an interview with a messenger whom he did not wish to see at home. On their part, the Musketeers, who had not much to do with the siege, were not under very strict orders and led a joyous life. This was the more easy for our 3 companions in particular, for being friends of Monsieur de Tréville, they obtained from him special permission to be absent after the closing of the camp. Now, one evening when D'Artagnan, who was in the trenches, was not able to accompany them, Athos, Porthos, and Aramis, mounted on their battle steeds, enveloped in their war cloaks, with their hands upon their pistol butts, were returning from a drinking place called the Red Dovecot, which Athos had discovered 2 days before upon the route to Jarry, following the road which led to the camp, and quite on their guard, as we have stated, for fear of an ambuscade. When about a quarter of a league from the village of Boisnau, they fancied they heard the sound of horses approaching them. They immediately all 3 halted, closed in, and waited, occupying the middle of the road. In an instant, and as the moon broke from behind a cloud, they saw at a turning of the road 2 horsemen, who on perceiving them stopped in their turn, appearing to deliberate whether they should continue their route or go back. The hesitation created some suspicion in the 3 friends, and Athos, advancing a few paces in front of the others, cried in a firm voice, "Who goes there?" "Who goes there yourselves?" replied one of the horsemen. "That is not an answer," replied Athos. "Who goes there? Answer, or we charge." "Beware of what you are about, gentlemen," said a clear voice which seemed accustomed to command. "It is some superior officer making his night rounds," said Athos. "What do you wish, gentlemen?" "Who are you?" said the same voice in the same commanding tone. "Answer in your turn, or you may repent of your disobedience." "King's Musketeers," said Athos, more and more convinced that he who interrogated them had the right to do so. "What company?" "Company of Tréville." "Advance, and give an account of what you are doing here at this hour." The 3 companions advanced rather humbly, for all were now convinced that they had to do with someone more powerful than themselves. Leaving Athos the post of speaker, one of the 2 riders, he who had spoken second, was 10 paces in front of his companion. Athos made a sign to Porthos and Aramis also to remain in the rear, and advanced alone. "Your pardon, my officer," said Athos, "but we were ignorant with whom we had to do, and you may see that we were keeping good guard." "Your name?" said the officer, who covered a part of his face with his cloak. But yourself, monsieur, said Athos, who began to be annoyed by this inquisition, give me, I beg you, the proof that you have the right to question me. Your name, repeated the cavalier a second time, letting his cloak fall and leaving his face uncovered. Monsieur the Cardinal? Cried the stupefied Musketeer. Your name, cried his Eminence for the third time. Athos, said the Musketeer. The Cardinal made a sign to his attendant, who drew near. These 3 Musketeers shall follow us, said he in an undertone. I am not willing it should be known I have left the camp, and if they follow us, we shall be certain they will tell nobody. We are gentlemen, Monseigneur, said Athos. Require our parole and give yourself no uneasiness. Thank God, we can keep a secret. The Cardinal fixed his piercing eyes on this courageous speaker. You have a quick ear, Monsieur Athos, said the Cardinal, but now listen to this. It is not from mistrust that I request you to follow me, but for my security. Your companions are no doubt Messieurs Porthos and Aramis. Yes, your Eminence, said Athos, while the 2 Musketeers who had remained behind advanced hat in hand. I know you, gentlemen, said the Cardinal. I know you. I know you are not quite my friends, and I am sorry you are not so, but I know you are brave and loyal gentlemen, and that confidence may be placed in you. Monsieur Athos, do me, then, the honor to accompany me, you and your 2 friends, and then I shall have an escort to excite envy in his Majesty if we should meet him. The 3 Musketeers bowed to the necks of their horses. Well, upon my honor, said Athos, your Eminence is right in taking us with you. We have seen several ill-looking faces on the road, and we have even had a quarrel at the Red Dovecot with 4 of those faces. A quarrel? And what for, gentlemen? Said the Cardinal. For you know I don't like quarrelers. And that is the reason why I have the honor to inform your Eminence of what has happened, for you might learn it from others, and upon a false account believe us to be in fault. What have been the results of your quarrel? Said the Cardinal, knitting his brow. My friend Aramis here has received a slight sword wound in the arm, but not enough to prevent him, as your Eminence may see, from mounting to the assault tomorrow, if your Eminence orders an escalade. But you are not the men to allow sword wounds to be inflicted upon you thus, said the Cardinal. Come, be frank, gentlemen. You have settled accounts with somebody. Confess. You know I have the right of giving absolution. I, Monseigneur, said Athos. I did not even draw my sword, but I took him who offended me round the body and threw him out of the window. It appears that in falling, continued Athos with some hesitation, he broke his thigh. Ha, 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 said the Cardinal. And you, Monsieur Porthos? I, Monseigneur, knowing that dueling is prohibited, I seized a bench and gave one of those brigands such a blow that I believe his shoulder is broken. Very well, said the Cardinal. And you, Monsieur Aramis? Monseigneur, being of a very mild disposition, and being likewise, of which Monseigneur perhaps is not aware, about to enter into orders, I endeavored to appease my comrades, when one of these wretches gave me a wound with a sword treacherously across my left arm. Then I admit my patience failed me. I drew my sword in my turn, and as he came back to charge, I fancied I felt that in throwing himself upon me, he let it pass through his body. I only know for a certainty that he fell, and it seems to me that he was borne away with his 2 companions. The devil, gentlemen, said the Cardinal. 3 men placed hors de combat in a cabaret squabble. You don't do your work by halves. And pray, what was this quarrel about? These fellows were drunk, said Athos, and knowing there was a lady who had arrived at the cabaret this evening, they wanted to force her door. Force her door, said the Cardinal. And for what purpose? To do her violence without doubt, said Athos. I have had the honor of informing your Eminence that these men were drunk. And was this lady young and handsome? Asked the cardinal with a certain degree of anxiety. We did not see her, monseigneur, said Athos. You did not see her? Ah, very well, replied the cardinal quickly. You did well to defend the honor of a woman, and as I am going to the Red Dovecot myself, I shall know if you have told me the truth. Monseigneur, said Athos haughtily, we are gentlemen, and to save our heads we would not be guilty of a falsehood. Therefore I do not doubt what you say, Monsieur Athos. I do not doubt it for a single instant. But, added he, to change the conversation, was this lady alone? The lady had a cavalier shut up with her, said Athos, but as notwithstanding the noise, this cavalier did not show himself. It is to be presumed that he is a coward. Judge not rashly, says the gospel, replied the cardinal. Athos bowed. And now, gentlemen, that's well, continued the cardinal. I know what I wish to know. Follow me. The three Musketeers passed behind his Eminence, who again enveloped his face in his cloak and put his horse in motion, keeping from 8 to 10 paces in advance of his 4 companions. They soon arrived at the silent, solitary inn. No doubt the host knew what illustrious visitor was expected, and had consequently sent intruders out of the way. 10 paces from the door the cardinal made a sign to his esquire and the 3 Musketeers to halt. A saddled horse was fastened to the window shutter. The cardinal knocked 3 times, and in a peculiar manner. A man enveloped in a cloak came out immediately and exchanged some rapid words with the cardinal, after which he mounted his horse and set off in the direction of Surgères, which was likely the way to Paris. Advance, gentlemen, said the cardinal. You have told me the truth, my gentlemen, said he, addressing the Musketeers, and it will not be my fault if our encounter this evening be not advantageous to you. In the meantime, follow me. The cardinal alighted. The 3 Musketeers did likewise. The cardinal threw the bridle of his horse to his esquire. The 3 Musketeers fastened the horses to the shutters. The host stood at the door. For him, the cardinal was only an officer coming to visit a lady. Have you any chamber on the ground floor where these gentlemen can wait near a good fire? Said the cardinal. The host opened the door of a large room, in which an old stove had just been replaced by a large and excellent chimney. I have this, said he. That will do, replied the cardinal. Enter, gentlemen, and be kind enough to wait for me. I shall not be more than half an hour. And while the 3 Musketeers entered the ground floor room, the cardinal, without asking further information, ascended the staircase like a man who has no need of having his road pointed out to him. End of chapter 43, recording by John Van Stan, Savannah, Georgia. Chapter 44 of the D'Artagnan Romances, Volume 1, The Three Musketeers by Alexandre Dumas, translated by William Robson. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The utility of stovepipes. It was evident that without suspecting it, and actuated solely by their chivalrous and adventurous character, our 3 friends had just rendered a service to someone the cardinal honored with his special protection. Now, who was that someone? That was the question the 3 Musketeers put to one another. Then, seeing that none of their replies could throw any light on the subject, Porthos called the host and asked for dice. Porthos and Aramis placed themselves at the table and began to play. Athos walked about in a contemplative mood. While thinking and walking, Athos passed and repassed before the pipe of the stove, broken in halves, the other extremity passing into the chamber above, and every time he passed and repassed, he heard a murmur of words, which at length fixed his attention. Athos went close to it, and distinguished some words that appeared to merit so great an interest that he made a sign to his friends to be silent, remaining himself bent, with his ear directed to the opening of the lower orifice. Listen, my lady, said the cardinal. The affair is important. Sit down, and let us talk it over. Milady, murmured Athos. I listen to your Eminence with the greatest attention, replied a female voice which made the Musketeers start. A small vessel with an English crew, whose captain is on my side, awaits you at the mouth of Charente, at Fort La Pointe, He will set sail tomorrow morning." Fort La Pointe, or Fort Vassal, was not built until 1672, nearly 50 years later.
"I must go thither tonight?"
"Instantly. That is to say, when you have received my instructions, 2 men whom you will find at the door on going out will serve you as escort. You will allow me to leave first. Then, after half an hour, you can go away in your turn."
"Yes, Monseigneur. Now let us return to the mission with which you wish to charge me, and as I desire to continue to merit the confidence of your Eminence, deign to unfold it to me in terms clear and precise, that I may not commit an error."
There was an instant of profound silence between the 2 interlocutors. It was evident that the cardinal was weighing beforehand the terms in which he was about to speak, and that Milady was collecting all her intellectual faculties to comprehend the things he was about to say, and to engrave them in her memory when they should be spoken. Athos took advantage of this moment to tell his 2 companions to fasten the door inside, and to make them a sign to come and listen with him. The 2 Musketeers, who loved their ease, brought a chair for each of themselves and one for Athos. All 3 then sat down with their heads together and their ears on the alert. "You will go to London," continued the cardinal. "Arrived in London, you will seek Buckingham."
"I must beg your Eminence to observe," said Milady, "that since the affair of the diamond studs, about which the Duke always suspected me, his Grace distrusts me."
"Well, this time," said the cardinal, "it is not necessary to steal his confidence, but to present yourself frankly and loyally as a negotiator."
"Frankly and loyally?"
repeated Milady with an unspeakable expression of duplicity. "Yes, frankly and loyally," replied the cardinal in the same tone. "All this negotiation must be carried on openly."
"I will follow your Eminence's instructions to the letter. I only wait till you give them."
"You will go to Buckingham in my behalf, and you will tell him I am acquainted with all the preparations he has made, but that they give me no uneasiness, since at the first step he takes, I will ruin the queen."
"Will he believe that your Eminence is in a position to accomplish the threat thus made?"
"Yes, for I have the proofs."
"I must be able to present these proofs for his appreciation."
"Without doubt. And you will tell him I will publish the report of Bois Robert and the Marquis de Beautru upon the interview which the Duke had at the residence of Madame the Constable with the Queen on the evening Madame the Constable gave a masquerade. You will tell him, in order that he may not doubt, that he came there in the costume of the Great Mogul, which the Chevalier de Guise was to have worn, and that he purchased this exchange for the sum of 3,000 pistoles."
"Well, Monseigneur?"
"All the details of his coming into and going out of the palace on the night when he introduced himself in the character of an Italian fortune-teller, you will tell him, that he may not doubt the correctness of my information, that he had under his cloak a large white robe dotted with black tears, death's head, and crossbones. For in case of a surprise, he was to pass for the phantom of the White Lady, who, as all the world knows, appears at the Louvre every time any great event is impending."
"Is that all, Monseigneur?"
"Tell him also that I am acquainted with all the details of the adventure at Amiens, that I will have a little romance made of it, wittily turned, with a plan of the garden and portraits of the principal actors in that nocturnal romance."
"I will tell him that."
"Tell him further that I hold Montague in my power, that Montague is in the Bastille, that no letters were found upon him, it is true, but that torture may make him tell much of what he knows, and even what he does not know."
"Exactly."
"Then add that his Grace has, in the precipitation with which he quit the Isle of Ré, forgotten and left behind him in his lodging a certain letter from Madame de Chevreuse, which singularly compromises the Queen, inasmuch as it proves not only that Her Majesty can love the enemies of the King, but that she can conspire with the enemies of France. You recollect perfectly all I have told you, do you not?"
"Your Eminence will judge the ball of Madame the Constable, the night at the Louvre, the evening at Amiens, the arrest of Montague, the letter of Madame de Chevreuse."
"That's it," said the cardinal. "That's it. You have an excellent memory, milady." "But," resumed she to whom the cardinal addressed this flattering compliment, "if in spite of all these reasons the Duke does not give way and continues to menace France—" "The Duke is in love to madness, or rather to folly," replied Richelieu, with great bitterness. "Like the ancient paladins, he has only undertaken this war to obtain a look from his lady love. If he becomes certain that this war will cost the honor, and perhaps the liberty, of the lady of his thoughts, as he says, I will answer for it he will look twice." "And yet," said Milady with a persistence that proved she wished to see clearly to the end of the mission with which she was about to be charged, "if he persists—" "If he persists," said the cardinal, "that is not probable." "It is possible," said Milady. "If he persists—" His Eminence made a pause, and resumed, "If he persists, well, then I shall hope for one of those events which change the destinies of states." "If your Eminence would quote to me some one of these events in history," said Milady, "perhaps I should partake of your confidence as to the future." "Well, here, for example," said Richelieu, "when in 1610, for a cause similar to that which moves the Duke, King Henri IV of glorious memory was about at the same time to invade Flanders and Italy in order to attack Austria on both sides. Well, did there not happen an event which saved Austria? Why should not the King of France have the same chance as the Emperor?" "Your Eminence means, I presume, the knife stab in the Rue de la Ferronnerie?" "Precisely," said the cardinal. "Does not your Eminence fear that the punishment inflicted upon Ravaillac may deter anyone who might entertain the idea of imitating him?" "There will be in all times and in all countries, particularly if religious divisions exist in those countries, fanatics who ask nothing better than to become martyrs. Aye, and observe, it just occurs to me that the Puritans are furious against Buckingham, and their preachers designate him as the Antichrist." "Well?" said Milady. "Well," continued the cardinal in an indifferent tone, "the only thing to be sought for at this moment is some woman, handsome, young, and clever, who has cause of quarrel with the Duke. The Duke has had many affairs of gallantry, and if he has fostered his amour by promises of eternal constancy, he must likewise have sown the seeds of hatred by his eternal infidelities." "No doubt," said Milady coolly. "Such a woman may be found." "Well, such a woman, who would place the knife of Jacques Clement or of Ravaillac in the hands of a fanatic, would save France." "Yes, but she would then be the accomplice of an assassination." "Were the accomplices of Ravaillac or of Jacques Clement ever known?" "No, for perhaps they were too high placed for anyone to dare look for them where they were. The Palace of Justice would not be burned down for everybody, Monseigneur." "You think, then, that the fire at the Palace of Justice was not caused by chance?" asked Richelieu in a tone with which he would have put a question of no importance. "I, Monseigneur," replied Milady, "I think nothing. I quote a fact, that is all. Only I say that if I were named Madame de Montpensier or the Queen Marie de Medicis, I should use less precautions than I take, being simply called Milady Cleric." "That is just," said Richelieu. "What do you require, then?" "I require an order which would ratify beforehand all that I should think proper to do for the greatest good of France." "But in the first place, this woman I have described must be found who is desirous of avenging herself upon the Duke." "She is found," said Milady. "Then the miserable fanatic must be found who will serve as an instrument of God's justice." "He will be found." "Well," said the cardinal, "then it will be time to claim the order which you just now required." "Your Eminence is right," replied Milady.
and I have been wrong in seeing in the mission with which you honor me anything but that which it really is. That is, to announce to His Grace, on the part of your Eminence, that you are acquainted with the different disguises by means of which she succeeded in approaching the Queen during the fête given by Madame the Constable, that you have proofs of the interview granted at the Louvre by the Queen to a certain Italian astrologer, who was no other than the Duke of Buckingham, that you have ordered a little romance of a satirical nature to be written upon the adventures of Amiens, with a plan of the gardens in which those adventures took place, and portraits of the actors who figured in them, that Montague is in the Bastille, and that the torture may make him say things he remembers, and even things he has forgotten, that you possess a certain letter from Madame de Chevreuse, found in His Grace's lodging, which singularly compromises not only her who wrote it, but her in whose name it was written. Then, if he persists notwithstanding all this, as that is, as I have said, the limit of my mission, I shall have nothing to do but to pray God to work a miracle for the salvation of France. That is it not, Monseigneur? And I shall have nothing else to do."
"That is it," replied the cardinal dryly.
"And now,"
said Milady, without appearing to remark the change of the Duke's tone toward her,
"now that I have received the instructions of your Eminence as concerns your enemies, Monseigneur will permit me to say a few words to him of mine?"
"Have you enemies, then?" asked Richelieu.
"Yes, Monseigneur, enemies against whom you owe me all your support, for I made them by serving your Eminence."
"Who are they?" replied the Duke.
"In the first place, there is a little intrigante named Bonacieux."
"She is in the prison of Nantes."
"That is to say, she was there," replied Milady, "but the Queen has obtained an order from the King, by means of which she has been conveyed to a convent."
"To a convent?" said the Duke.
"Yes, to a convent."
"And to which?"
"I don't know. The secret has been well kept."
"But I will know."
"And your Eminence will tell me in what convent that woman is."
"I can see nothing inconvenient in that," said the cardinal.
"Well now, I have an enemy much more to be dreaded by me than this little Madame Bonacieux."
"Who is that?"
"Her lover."
"What is his name?"
"Oh, your Eminence knows him well," cried Milady, carried away by her anger. "He is the evil genius of both of us. It is he who, in an encounter with your Eminence's guards, decided the victory in favor of the King's Musketeers. It is he who gave 3 desperate wounds to De Ward, your emissary, and who caused the affair of the diamond studs to fail. It is he who, knowing it was I who had Madame Bonacieux carried off, has sworn my death."
"Ah, ha," said the cardinal. "I know of whom you speak."
"I mean that miserable D'Artagnan."
"He is a bold fellow," said the cardinal.
"And it is exactly because he is a bold fellow that he is the more to be feared."
"I must have," said the Duke, "a proof of his connection with Buckingham."
"A proof?" cried Milady. "I will have 10."
"Well, then it becomes the simplest thing in the world. Get me that proof, and I will send him to the Bastille."
"So far good, Monseigneur, but afterwards?"
"When once in the Bastille, there is no afterward," said the cardinal in a low voice. "Ah, pardieu!" continued he, "if it were as easy for me to get rid of my enemy as it is easy to get rid of yours, and if it were against such people you require impunity—"
"Monseigneur," replied Milady, "a fair exchange, life for life, man for man. Give me one, I will give you the other."
"I don't know what you mean, nor do I even desire to know what you mean," replied the cardinal. "But I wish to please you, and see nothing out of the way in giving you what you demand with respect to so infamous a creature, the more so as you tell me this D'Artagnan is a libertine, a duelist, and a traitor."
"An infamous scoundrel, Monseigneur, a scoundrel."
Give me paper, a quill, and some ink, then, said the cardinal.
Here they are, Monseigneur.
There was a moment of silence which proved that the cardinal was employed in seeking the terms in which he should write the note, or else in writing it. Athos, who had not lost a word of the conversation, took his two companions by the hand and led them to the other end of the room.
Well,
said Porthos,
what do you want, and why do you not let us listen to the end of the conversation?
Hush, said Athos, speaking in a low voice. We have heard all it was necessary we should hear. Besides, I don't prevent you from listening, but I must be gone.
You must be gone,
said Porthos.
And if the cardinal asks for you, what answer can we make?
You will not wait till he asks. You will speak first and tell him that I am gone on the lookout, because certain expressions of our host have given me reason to think the road is not safe. I will say 2 words about it to the cardinal's esquire likewise. The rest concerns myself. Don't be uneasy about that.
Be prudent, Athos,
said Aramis. Be easy on that head, replied Athos. You know I am cool enough. Porthos and Aramis resumed their places by the stovepipe. As to Athos, he went out without any mystery, took his horse, which was tied with those of his friends to the fastenings of the shutters, in 4 words convinced the attendant of the necessity of a vanguard for their return, carefully examined the priming of his pistols, drew his sword, and took, like a forlorn hope, the road to the camp. End of chapter 44. Recording by John Van Stan, Savannah, Georgia.
So, if the scene between Milady and the cardinal didn't scare the bejuju's out of you in kind of sympathy with the 3 guys listening, holy cow, Richelieu knows everything. Everything. And did you notice he didn't have any notes? Yes, he paused before speaking. He didn't have any notes. And even scarier, Milady was not writing anything down either. And then she was just like, boom, 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 right back at him. Yeah, that's what I'm going to go do. These are all the things you need me to do for you. On it, babe. Woof. Totally, totally terrifying people. But to go back to the beginning, I loved that D'Artagnan believed that the 3 Musketeers could have partied so hard that they would have to be incarcerated by the Lord of the Manor, just to, give him time to calm down and sober up. I also loved that Aramis's response was like, I'm shocked to think that you would think that we could cause a problem because we were having too good a time. I mean, really. There were several different moments in that sequence that I loved. Porthos manages to get out of having his Duchess, in air quotes, find out where Constance is, and the way he backs out of it is by saying, well, no, I can't trust her to do that. She's a cardinalist. And of course, she's not a duchess at all. She's the lawyer's wife. So that was some very fast footwork on his part. I also thought early on in that first chapter, it was interesting that the guy who had tried to assassinate D'Artagnan, who accidentally drank the poisoned wine, the lees of the wine, D'Artagnan says very specifically he wants him buried in hallowed ground. Now, as we know, I am not Catholic. I thought it was interesting that Aramis sent too late for a priest. I'm assuming that was to do last rites. Is there, or was there at the time, any kind of Catholic law that if you hadn't received last rites, you couldn't be buried in hallowed ground? I know that there were different ways that you could get yourself booted, like suicides weren't allowed, that kind of thing. But I didn't know about this, but I did think it was interesting that both of those conversations happened, that Aramis tried to get a priest there, and D'Artagnan, regardless, wanted this guy to be buried properly, probably somewhat out of guilt, but also because D'Artagnan is trying to be a stand-up guy, and I respect that. I don't know if you caught this, and I don't know if I'm right, but at the beginning of chapter 43, when the king has arrived and everybody's kind of in a flurry of stuff and the cardinal is there and he's got all his people in a flurry of stuff, there are guys who were dressed like monks who looked uncomfortable in their robes, and there were women dressed as pages who were wearing kind of voluminous pants, but not so voluminous that you couldn't tell that they were women. And I thought, okay, this is bizarre. I know that there have always been women who have traveled with war parties, and sometimes, of course, they were prostitutes. Sometimes they were the wives who were just there to like make sure the guys ate and slept enough. So this doesn't sound like that. This sounded to me like some of this must have been Richelieu and his spies, his little ears all over the place. But I don't know if I'm at all correct about that. And I certainly can't tell from the French if there's more of subtextual implications going on there. But I did think that was very, very interesting. I also thought it was quite interesting that Richelieu's whole thing about assassins, the threat of assassins, was a way to make it, quote unquote, legal to take revenge, to dole out some retribution on the people who were supposed to have set up the assassins, whether or not they really did. Like if he, as the book implies, hired some really lousy assassins to, quote unquote, assassinate him, and he just happened to have his good soldiers kill them. So much the better, because now you have a way to legitimately get back at your enemies. This is certainly something that we see happening in the modern world. It's a tactic that's been used rather well for a very long time, and that is very, very sad and upsetting. On the other hand, I thought the way that Richelieu first tried to find out who they were when they met in the woods at night in the dark was very interesting. I also thought their reaction to him was very interesting, but I particularly loved his line, I know you are not quite my friends, but, we can be of use to each other. And I'm not bringing you with me to keep you from talking. I know you're gentlemen. I know you would keep your word. I'm keeping you with me because I could use your protection. And I thought, you know what? He's probably full of it, but it doesn't matter because that's such a great way to make it impossible for them to say no. He's just so bloody smart, this guy. I also truly loved and laughed out loud every time I heard it, the descriptions of how Athos didn't kill anyone with a sword. He just picked the guy up and defenestrated him. And it was a shame that when he landed, his leg apparently broke. It's just the weirdest thing. And then Aramis is all like, well, there was nothing I could do. He just walked into my sword that happened to be up and pointed at him. Poor guy. Oh, I love when Dumas gets on a roll like that. He's just so much fun. So the thing that I didn't want to get into before the chapters is there are a couple of references to both the assassination of Henri III and Henri IV. Now, Henri IV is the father of our current king, Louis XIII, and Henri III was his dad. I have put links to very well done Britannica kind of biographical pages on both of them that include the information about their assassinations. The thing that Milady says that is a throwaway line, and I'm sure that people who were reading this contemporarily at the time would have totally gotten what she meant, was she's talking about assassinations and getting caught and things like that. And she makes the comment about the fire at the Palais de Justice. Okay, apparently all of the records about who really assassinated Henri IV were stored at the Palais. And there was a conspiracy theory going around at the time that that fire was not accidental, that it was arson, and that it was specifically to burn up the records of the people who were involved in that conspiracy. Just thought that was kind of interesting. And that, my friends, is it for me. I am going to go lie down and prepare for the onslaught tomorrow. You take care of yourself. By the time you're hearing this, the election will be over and I might be vertical again. Yay. You take care of yourself. Be well. I will talk to you soon. Have a good one. Bye.
A big thanks to all the CraftLit listeners who support the show by being a premium audio member via craftlit.com/premium or via patreon.com/craftlit. Your support for the show is what's kept us going since 2006. If you feel like getting free audio pretty much every week, please consider supporting the show by heading over to patreon.com/craftlit and pledging what you feel the show is worth to you. If you can't support the show that way, consider leaving a review at iTunes or at our facebook.com/craftlit page, or follow @craftlit on Twitter and share the show with your followers too. And remember, if your hands are too busy to pick up a book, at least you can turn one on.